Hi, Sam. Sorry, I'll say again. Hi, Sam. How are you doing today?
Hi, George. I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm okay. This is my third coffee of the morning, so we are where we are. But I'm excited to have the opportunity to talk to you. It must be an interesting week you've got ahead of you.
Certainly. You say third coffee. I'm on my second bag of coffee for the week. So,
Oh wow, that's definitely a mood. So I I think everyone knows that elections are super stressful, and they come in deadline season, and it's difficult for everyone. So why are you putting yourself through it? Why are you running?
um, that's a very good question, and a question I've asked myself many times this week. But the answer is always the same. I love Saints sport, and that sounds really corny, and sounds really cheesy, but it is the reality. I hated sport until I came to St Andrews, and that's not something that many AU presidents are gonna
Yeah.
say. My sporting experience until I arrived at St Andrews was mainly negative, and
Okay.
it wasn't until I was welcomed into the Saints sport community that I suddenly found that passion and that enthusiasm. And the community has given me so much that I want to help the community. I want to strengthen it. I want to improve it, and I want to make it the best it can be because they've done that for me. And so, to me, that's why I'm running, and that's why I'm putting myself through this, and
Yeah.
why it will be worthwhile.
That's an unexpected but a very nice answer. I quite like that. Um, so you say that you were welcomed into the community and that they made you feel at home, whereas perhaps you weren't in sport before. I'm wondering, like, what specific things about Saint Sports did you find so welcoming that you would try and emulate in your role next year were you to be elected?
Definitely, I think it comes down to the Saints' values. Like the again, I'm always shocked that people don't know that Saints stands for something, and it is the values. And yet they all emulate them on a day-to-day basis. And everyone I've ever met through Saint Sport personifies that selfless, affable nature, and that I think is what makes the community special. That everyone here is here and united in a common purpose, and that is to make sport enjoyable and to make sport as great as it can be. And being part of that purpose and that manifesto, that sort of movement.
A Freudian slip
Manifesto
there,
on the
I
brain.
think.
But being part of that movement and being part of that purpose is so indicative of the community and so special.
Yeah, thank you. And am I right in saying, and I might be wrong, am I right in saying that you're a third year?
I am a third.
So does that mean that, like, were you doing a 3-year degree, or would this mean that you're taking a little break?
I would be taking a little break.
Okay.
So it would be a year out for me. But as sport is my sort of my academic interest, which I think always shocks people because they go, "Oh, St Andrews doesn't have a sports degree." I study economics and IR, and there are numerous crossovers with sport. I'm particularly interested in sports diplomacy, sports governance, sports for development. And that's where a lot of my ideas come from is like one of my favorite programs, and this is gonna again make me sound really nerdy, but that's I guess what this is for, is a program in Libya which uses surfing for conflict resolution. That's fascinating. Okay. And that's what my academic passion is. So when I was talking it through and going, should I run for AU president? It means a year out. A lot of people have rephrased it to me. For me, it's just a year in industry, and not just a year in industry, but it's what I want to dedicate my life to and like work towards. So to me, it's not disconnected from my degree. It's what I find enjoyable and what I'm passionate about and what I'm studying at the end of the day.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that does make a lot of sense. I don't know what I was anticipating, but again, that's not the answer I was anticipating. But why now and not next year? Why not take another year to study all of these sports things that you've been studying and use what you might learn in your fourth year, maybe through a dissertation? And why not do it at the end? Why now, in the middle of a global pandemic, would you like to be doing this?
Because I think the global pandemic offers us an opportunity and a really exciting one to build back better. And I hate that phrase, and I know it's been battered around a lot, but it is accurate. And the conversations that are happening in sport at the moment are something that I'm fighting to be a part of. I work with Scottish Rowing as their Director of Youth Engagement, and sort of the conversations we're having with Sport Scotland and Scottish Student Sport are so exciting that I just really want to be a part of that change and that movement. And I think the best place to do that is as AU president, and that's just not something I want to wait for. I want to be part of that change now, and want to make sure that we capitalise on the successes of this year. Talking to Stephen Stewart, he said we achieved a 75% participation rate in semester 1. So 3/4 of students participated in sport last semester. That is phenomenal, and we need to capture that and keep going with that and keep pushing that forward.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting how you point out in semester 1. I'm just wondering, throughout the manifestos, and this isn't an AU specific thing, you know, the big elephant in the room is the pandemic. And so are you anticipating, so what are you envisaging when you walk in July or September or whenever it is that you take office? If we do sadly see a situation where there's a variant that means we are locked down, we're not all back, and you're sort of battling with the role in the same way that the current AU president is this term, what would you still be hoping to achieve in that kind of virtual world? Because we can't rule it out, even though, touch wood, hopefully that won't be happening.
First, can I say I love your optimism that you've said when I get into office. Loving the optimism, because like everyone in this candidate, and it's such a nice relief to have that competition and that camaraderie between myself, Dylan, and Jess. That's, I think, gonna only make Saint Sport stronger, regardless of the outcome. But for me, my manifesto, everything in there can be implemented in a COVID world and in a lockdown world. Ideally, it wouldn't have to be, but I've been very careful in sort of what I've promised and what I can do to try and make sure that everything there can be done in a sort of pandemic world. And we have the benefit of hindsight. When Sophie ran, COVID was still a little known thing that was happening in other parts of the world and wasn't going to affect St Andrews. And yet she's managed to turn her manifesto, which was unaware of COVID when she wrote it, into a fantastically successful presidency. So I can't imagine me, who's fully aware of what COVID can do and sort of the impact it can have on sports in St Andrews and life in St Andrews and just life in general, how I can't also adapt and show that same sort of strength and versatility.
Do you worry that the pandemic might leave the university or in a situation where either there's going to be a hike in membership fees, which, you know, membership restructuring is something you talk about a lot, that we'll see a situation where either AU funding is cut or you'll have to increase membership fees in order to sustain, for example, the scholarships that you want to promise? Because I think it's very important that we do look at the financial inaccessibility of the membership as it currently is, which is something all of the candidates touch on. Mm-hmm. And I wondered if you do have that fear and what you would do if you're in a situation where there actually isn't any extra money. How do you think you could still make it more accessible for these people that can't afford to spend 180 quid on the gym?
That is probably my greatest fear, that I'll use your words, when I take AU president's office, I get a lovely email from Sally Mapstone and it says, by the way, you have no budget. That sends me into an absolute panic. Not just from an AU president point of view, but as a sports person and an athlete's point of view. I think everyone is scared of the damage that could be done to sport, because sadly sport is often where funding is cut. I do think that's the reality that I'll sort of have to face when it happens and if it happens. But the scholarships and bursary, my plan was always to fund that through development and development initiatives. So during my time as development officer with the boat club, we raised £35,000 to purchase new boats to try and bring more people into the sport and make the sport more accessible and increase our sort of capacity to bring people in, as well as increase performance. And working with the development office on that project, I saw the amount of potential that was there to use alumni, to use donors to sort of fund these initiatives. And we see that with the John Honey scholarship that's run through Saints Funder and things like that. I think there's a huge amount of potential for Saints Sport to capitalise on that as well, to fund these hardship funds, to fund these bursaries, to fund these scholarships. And also there's a great amount of change that's coming in from Scottish Government, from British Government, and more funding becoming available for sports because they do recognise it's important in the recovery process. So I'm hopeful and I'm optimistic that we won't face a reality where funding is massively cut. But that's not to say there won't be a difficult financial future ahead.
Yeah.
Hopefully, as an economist, I'm prepared. But who knows? And like I say, it will very much depend on what happens when your word again, I get to office.
I don't mean to say that as an endorsement necessarily. I think it's just easier to speak that way rather than, because, you know, I think it's quite awkward to be cut up in the ifs. And then if I accidentally do say when, then it's like, oh, I think I'm going to win. So it's easier just to presume that whoever I'm talking to is going to win. I think I have to legally say that that's not an endorsement. One thing that
No,
you do,
I agree.
and so you talk about improving. So I'm going to go on a little bit now about performance sport. As someone who's mostly involved with and on the Shinty committee, I wouldn't say that elite performance sport is something that I'm overly familiar with, but you talk about increasing support for performance sport, but you also talk a lot about sustainability. And I'm wondering if you think there's a tension between supporting performance sport and sustainability, because, you know, supporting performance sport might look like letting people go internationally, but then that would increase the kind of CO2 emissions. And also in a COVID world where it's unlikely that we'll be able to have 15 people on a minibus, you have to take more cars to go to matches or whatever. So I'm wondering how you think you can provide that that elite potential and also work towards sustainability kind of at the same time.
Definitely. I think people see performance sport as something in tension with basic human morality at times, and there is always this sort of bad perception of performance sport that it doesn't work with sustainability, it doesn't support with inclusion, and that's just not the case. I mean, if Japan can run an Olympics which is carbon neutral, I think we can find a way to ensure that if being the operative words in that statement, but if we can find a way to if Japan can do that, then I'm sure we can find a way to be both sustainable and support our athletes going to international competitions and going on these sort of things. And I don't think they are incompatible at all. I think actually a lot of elite athletes are some of the biggest climate change advocates out there. And look at F1, which was previously a massive source of carbon emissions and have completely changed their sort of outlook around sustainability and have become a really good global force for that. And I think that's something to be really admired. Same with Japan and the Tokyo Olympics, same with the International Olympic Committee and Agenda 2020. There's a huge amount of potential there. And I just think it shows that performance sport is not incompatible with sustainability.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And I think so what would you say is, so if Japan can find a way to do it, I'm sure Japan has like hundreds of pages of documents that like detailing how they're going to do it. And I'm not asking you if you've read them, and nor would I. I just mean, what would be sort of your, and this is regurgitating your manifesto a bit, but just giving you a chance to talk about it. What would you say would be your sort of like first sustainability policy? So sort of, when you come in, what's the first thing that you do that makes Saint Sport more sustainable?
I think the first thing is effective advocacy. That is something that I think is highly underestimated. We like to talk about big issues and we like to talk about, for example, carbon emissions. That is not something that a 20-year-old student can solve. And actually, what would be more effective for that 20-year-old student to do is use a reusable water bottle, bring their own towel to the gym. These sorts of things are examples of effective advocacy and small changes that make a massive difference once accumulated. And for me, that was something that became really apparent. And again, when I was 16, I worked at Lush and was completely indoctrinated into the whole hippy dippy lifestyle, as they call it. That's their words, not mine. And they showed in a lot of ways that small, minuscule changes have a really big impact. Stuff around packaging, stuff around little things that they could change and control. And I think that ethos would be something that I would want to bring over to Saint Sport. We are now increasingly moving to digital. So let's transform Saint Sport into a paperless organisation. Let's look at how we make our kit. Can we make it with recycled materials? That's something that I've got to do through Here for Sport, and something I'm really passionate there is that all the sort of kit that I make through my charity is made from recycled materials. That these sort of small changes that we can make and start asking about and promoting will really have a big impact if you consider the membership of Saint Sport.
Thank you. I think that's a very good answer. I mean, I'm not going to tell you it's a bad answer. I mean, but it is a good answer. So you've touched on your charity that you have there, which is something I will ask you about in a minute or so. I'm just saying that out loud so that I don't forget, because I have got it written on like 3 different pieces of paper here. But just before we move on from that, I think something interesting that you touched on, and I don't think this is necessarily like an AU president specific issue. When people run for student politics, so I can say this as someone who's ran for union positions before, we have all these kind of bold ideas of what we want to do in an ideal world. I do this, I do that, and not just the pandemic, but the reality is when it comes to like the union structure, there's only so much that a union representative can do. So how do you see yourself functioning within that? Because I feel like something that students perhaps don't quite grasp, and I'm including myself in students, I'm not independent of this confusion, is when I'm electing you, what am I actually electing you to do? Like, how does the AU, in your understanding, function within the body of Saint Sport, and what do you see yourself as being able to impact, and what sort of things would you say aren't in your remit that people might think are?
See, I think this is one of the great joys of AU president, is that the AU president has a lot more freedom because of Saint Sport. They are a part of the senior management team at Saint Sport and have a lot of control and a lot of sort of influence over what happens in Saint Sport. And of course, they are limited and they are constrained. They can't just sort of decide to do away with everything, but they work really closely with the likes of Duncan, Fergus, Stephen, Claire, Heather. I'm trying to remember all the names, but I've definitely forgotten, like Elaine. There are so many people within Saint Sport that do fantastic work, and the AU president works closely with all of them to sort of influence almost every aspect of Saint Sport. And that's something that I think we should celebrate about Saint Sport. I will say that after working with the AU this year as volunteering engagement officer, I've got a really great insight into sort of how that works and on what I can achieve in a year. When I went into the volunteering engagement post, I was adamant I was going to run frequent social responsibility campaigns. I was going to do weekly spotlights of students. I submitted this, and you'll have seen from my manifesto, I like to give detail. I like to write. I like to have long analysis. I wrote a great document. It was about 40 pages long on this is the campaign of every week for the university. And I submitted it to the comms team, and we had great conversations. But inevitably, that didn't happen. And it was that realization that actually we can't just spam our social media with campaigns every week. And that's why we use these commemorative days as really good focal points. And what was even more fascinating is that clubs don't want us to do that. When I've been talking to the wellbeing officers throughout the year going, right, we'd really love you guys to share your experiences about X or tell us about Y. Typically I get 2 or 3 responses, and that's not enough to base the campaign, and that's not enough to push through change. And that's sort of one of the things that is really important about these elections, is not just electing us so that we can do these ideas, but get your buy-in and get your support and have you excited about the change. And that's really what I want to bring, is create that excitement for change and excitement for all these plans that we have, and celebrate Saint Sport, because we're doing a fantastic job. There are obviously areas for improvement, but this year when working with the LGBT Charter, we got the Silver Award, and Triple S have recognised us as some of the best in Scotland. And all of our policies on LGBT inclusion and our sort of action plan on that, which myself and Claire worked really closely on, they've been recognised as best practice and are now being sent to other universities to learn from. We don't get to that position without hard work and determination, and also that does show we are doing something right. So to go, no doubt, but we are getting there.
So I think that all sounds very impressive. You're talking a lot about transparency and detail and hard work, and that only makes me think about what I would say probably is my favorite point of your manifesto, which mainly because I think it might end up being slightly spicy, is the publication of a breakdown of where the money for an AU member goes. And my anticipation is there will be some people that might not be particularly satisfied with where some of their money is going. For example, there is a tension between, somebody who does elite performance sport and is maybe using the gym 6 times a week and gets to use the performance suite, versus someone who's joined it because they have to join it to be a part of a club. So I think I have 2 questions here, which you can kind of answer together because it's all part of membership restructure. The one is, and I know that you can buy a club membership and have less, but do you think it's fair that if I'm not going to really be using the AU facilities except for the pitch, that I have to pay £90 to be able to pay £15 to join a club. This seems like something that is a big barrier to accessibility. And secondly, when you publish this report, which shows where the money goes, how do you think you're going to be able to deal with the challenges that you might face in that? Do you think you have the ability, like not as in are you smart enough or good enough, but I mean within the way that the structure works, to actually reallocate that money? Because that is a very high up decision that's made, and I know that from where I work in the union, we don't have as much control over money as we think we do. And so, yeah, like I can envisage that being a difficult time for whoever's involved. And I wondered how you see that going.
I have to say that this work has been pioneered by Sophie and driven by Dylan and their passion, and I'm incredibly inspired by that. So this isn't something that is happening in a vacuum. This is something that is already taking place, and it will be the responsibility of the next AU president, whether that's me, Jess, or Dylan, to take that over. My aim is to make that as public as possible, whether that's uploading it onto the new Saint Sport website, whether that's publishing that in the sort of SABS email. That's my aim, to make sure that is transparent so that people can raise challenges, because it's no good having an organisation that will never be challenged. That's not productive, and that's not going to help improvement. Any sports person knows you need a challenge. You need to be you need to be knocked back to move forward. And so that, I think, is a vital part of this process, is people challenging us and saying, why is that money going there? That doesn't benefit me. And Saint Sport are fully aware of that, which is why they're doing this, because they want to make sure that everyone is getting the benefit they can from the money they give. But also, I think there's an appreciation of everything that Saint Sport do. For example, when you're saying, paying £90 to use the pitch and paying £15 just to join a club, that pitch requires a lot of maintenance. It requires handyman, it requires lighting, it requires sort of regular updates. And but you're using the pitch, you've also got to use the toilets, which also require cleaning. You've got to use the changing facilities. I think there's a tendency to oversimplify things a little bit, and sort of say, well, I don't ever use the gym, I just use the dance studio. But someone has to look after that dance studio. Someone has to maintain that dance studio. And yes, you might not use the exercise classes that someone has been putting on for free. You might not, but I would hope that people and members here are sort of willing to make those small concessions to the benefit of the community. And that is the point of a membership, is you aren't going to benefit from every single penny, because that's not possible. You are going to help benefit others though, and that's what makes things financially accessible. Instead of making that £90, I think of myself as a rower, the sort of average costs that I pay in a year to row are massive, and we bear a lot of that as our members. And it makes the sport inaccessible, and it's something that I'm trying to tackle through Scottish Rowing and trying to tackle through British government. There's a great committee that are rowers as MPs, and they're all MPs and they all row, and they're fighting to make financial accessibility in sport because they know how powerful that is, and I've been working closely with them on that. But the sort of little bits of money that get put into the performance suite or get put into that mean that rowing is no longer completely inaccessible. I'm very much on the cusp that if fees went up by £10 in rowing, I would have to quit, because I cannot afford to row at the best of times. And that's what people need to appreciate, is that yes, they're not going to benefit from every single penny, but we want to make sure that you know where your money's going, that you know that there is someone benefiting if it's not you.
No, that's fair enough. I think, I was wanting to ask because, because I think beyond just getting actual answer, because I know obviously that the way that money is allocated isn't actually is not your responsibility. You're not the one deciding where that money goes. It's just good to have a feel of the understanding that people have of the structures. So I hope you don't feel like I was questioning you on why the AU puts their money where they do, because that's not your job.
And equally, I'm a bit of a novice to it. I've not been AU treasurer. Dylan has. Dylan knows where all the money's going, and Dylan is incredibly experienced in handling this, and their experience has been invaluable because they have helped me in that. They have educated me through AU Exec, and they have told me so much about the structure, and I've chipped in where I can, but their knowledge is fantastic in that area, and I do want to give Dylan props for that, because their work and dedication to that is impressive, and there's no getting around that.
All right, thank you very much. I'm sure Dylan will appreciate those kind words. I also appreciate you taking so much time to speak to me. I have just 2 quick final questions for you, and I am aware that we are at the end of the scheduled amount of meeting time. So if you have to go, that's fine. But if you've got
No.
another 3 or 4 minutes, that would be that'd be fab. The first question, I mean, I'm not going to ask them both at once, so I'll just ask you what I'm going to ask you, which is, from reading your manifesto, I see that you have your own charity, your own sports charity. I wondered if you could just tell everyone a little bit about it, and then also talk about how that will fit into the AU presidency, in the sense of, are you going to take a step back from it? Are other people going to be running it? Are you going to dedicate yourself to both? I think you understand the question. So just tell us a bit about the charity and what that charity looks like when you're AU president.
Yeah, of course. So Here for Sport is a charity that works to reduce barriers to participation. So we target not just financial barriers, but also societal barriers and cultural barriers, and psychological barriers. There's so much that we do in that area, and that doesn't just look at sort of grassroots level. That's national level as well. We work with policymakers. We work with funding bodies. We've worked with UK Sport, National Lottery. My sort of proudest moment was giving a lecture at Loughborough University, because I'm such a nerd and I enjoyed that so much, because I was able to just nerd out for an hour and people had to listen, which is my idea of heaven. As you can guess, I do love to talk. But for me, Here for Sport and the AU president's goals aren't incompatible. They are incredibly compatible. They are trying to do the same thing. They're trying to make sport accessible. They're trying to make sport fun. And yes, as AU president, I would have to dedicate more time to Saint Sport and less time to Here for Sport. And I'm fully prepared to do that. This year, we recruited new volunteers to help run Here for Sport, because we were growing and expanding. And that's something that I'm really proud of. But that means that we have the capabilities to take on more sort of effort there, and I can sort of dedicate more time to the AU president's role. But at the same time, I've managed to juggle a degree, volunteering engagement, and working at Scottish Rowing with the sort of Here for Sport. So it's not something I'll ever put down, because that is my passion, and that's what I will do. And I want to work on it as long as I can and keep making those changes happen.
All right, fantastic. Thank you very much. And I'll just leave you on one final question, which I put down as my second question after how are you, but I forgot to ask, which is, who would you say your sporting idol is? Just a little fun question to finish off on.
Catherine Granger has to be. Learned to row as a novice like myself, and then went on to be one of the most successful female athletes, and continues to shape and change the landscape of sport for the better. She is such a massive inspiration to me, and I got to meet her at an event in Edinburgh, and she was so lovely and so kind, and she's been incredibly supportive of Here for Sport and everything we've tried to do there. And it also has the added benefit of her being a alumnus, kind of, with honorary degree doctorate of St Andrews. So, she's an amazing person and a real inspiration, I think, to a lot of people, but particularly to me. There
Fantastic.
are others as well.
Oh.
She's the one that comes off my head every time.
Thank you very much. That does make a lot of sense. I'm just going to stop the recording now. Thank you very much for taking the time to speak to me, and best of luck with what I'm sure will be a very fun week ahead.
Oh, yeah, thank you, George, and good luck with your deadlines, and thank you for this. So.
Thank you.